Chris Henning is our co-host this evening. She's joining us from, well, she has two roles now. She's actually Iowa Division.
I'm still here.
Yeah. Okay, great. I was just going to say you're from the Panora Conservation Chapter, and you are a board member now of the Iowa Division of the Izaak Walton League. So welcome. Welcome, everybody. My name is Christine Curry, and I am the Outreach Coordinator of the Iowa Division of the Izaak Walton League. Our monthly Watershed Talks is a project of the Iowa Division with rotating co-hosts from Iowa chapters. We feature guests for 30 to 40-minute presentations that shed daylight on good works done in Iowa watersheds. In this way, we uplift our shared goals for cleaner water, a cleaner or a healthy environment, and kinder communities. And the recorded programs will be available at iowaikes.com shortly after they are aired live. We will continue to focus and highlight the legacy of the Izaak Walton League as one of America's first conservation organizations leading significant conservation policy. 100 years ago, this year, the League was the driving force behind the creation of the Upper Mississippi River National Wildlife and Fish Refuge, which protects wildlife habitat along 261 miles of the river in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Illinois. This evening, we have Chris Jones with us with our title, Clean Water Matters, a scientist and angler's perspective, how one of Iowa's leading researchers uses his voice to amplify why clean water matters. This evening, we're going to learn more from author, scientist, and angler, Chris, about how he has been able to share his knowledge and expertise with others concerning the truth and the significance of Iowa's water pollution problems. Chris has spent decades of his professional career working with private and public sectors of agriculture, environment, and water. As a former University of Iowa water quality researcher engineer, Chris remains at the forefront of data illustrating the damaging intersection of intensive corn, soybean, and CAFO systems with Iowa's landscape throughout the Mississippi watershed. Chris's book, The Swine Republic, has been chosen by the Library of Congress Center of the book to be one of 56 books included in Great Reads from Great Places list for the 2024 National Book Festival. And we recently learned from his blog that over his lifetime, he has cleaned at least 5,000 fish that he's caught and probably eaten about half of those. In the interest of writing, he says he likes to share his Iowa best quality fish species. I'm going to be putting the links to his blog and also to his Swine Republic book in the chat box. So I highly recommend that that you look at those seriously if you want to learn some of these great things that we're going to be talking, that Chris is going to be sharing with us this evening. So, and I would like to point out that we have Dale Braun, our division president, with us, and Dale is a big advocate of Chris's, and we're going to go right to Chris right now, and thank you, Chris, for being with us.
Okay, thanks, Christine, for the invitation and that generous introduction. And so, as a matter of fact, I can look out my window here and see the Upper Mississippi River Wildlife and Fish Refuge. And so I am about half-time in Iowa City and about half-time in DeSoto, Wisconsin, which is right across the river from Lansing, Iowa, and looking down on the Winneshiek Bottoms from my window, and this is what the Izaak Walton League saved 100 years ago from agriculture. They wanted to drain that down there and farm it, and this was a huge, huge victory, and it's almost unfathomable to imagine a victory of this magnitude in the present day. And just to tell you how big that victory was, when we look at the area of the upper Mississippi River upstream of Rock Island, only 3% of the floodplain is farmed. Okay. Downstream from Rock Island, about 50% of it is farmed. And so that tells you how huge that was to save this up here. It was enormous. And so this is the bluff land there on the Iowa side, I think, in my opinion, is the most beautiful part of Iowa, running from about Bellevue up to the Minnesota border. And of course, I'm over here on the Wisconsin side, and I can see Iowa, and so I can see the Lansing Bridge, and so I really love it here, and I think this is something we society owes a great debt to the Walton League for saving this. And so a little bit about me. My folks are from Knoxville, Iowa, and Marion County. I actually was born in Monmouth, Illinois, which is across the river from Burlington a little bit. My dad worked for the railroad over there, and then my folks moved to Ankeny when I was 6 years old, and so I spent most of my childhood in Ankeny. I went to Simpson College in Indianola, and then I went to graduate school at Montana State University in Bozeman. I worked in the contract laboratory business for a while in Minnesota. Actually, more than a while, about 12 years. And then I did consulting work up there for water and wastewater utilities for about 5 years, and then came back to Iowa to work at the Des Moines Water Works. I worked there from 2003 until 2011. I got a little bored with that and took a job with the Iowa Soybean Association, who I had worked with their environmental group when I was at the waterworks. And they were opening a new facility in Ankeny, which is where I lived. And so I went up there and worked for soybean for 4 years and helped them get their lab started in the facility there in Ankeny, where they do some water quality testing for their watershed projects. Then in 2015, I was approached by people at the University of Iowa about coming over there to work and manage the network of water quality sensors that are deployed around the state of Iowa. And so I came over to the University of Iowa in 2015 and then retired almost exactly a year ago. I think May 16th last year was my last day. And so I've been retired for a year. And yes, I published a book almost a year ago, right now, The Swine Republic. And so the book has done fairly well, I think. And so, as Christine said, it was picked as the Iowa representative for the National Book Festival, which the Library of Congress hosts in August. And then I have my Substack, which I write for, and that's at riverraccoon.substack.com. And so I try to post things about every 10 days or so. And in fact, I'm going to post something tomorrow morning. And so I continue to write on these topics of water quality and agriculture in Iowa. Also, I'm involved with a new group being formed by an attorney in Iowa City. His name's Jim LaRue, who's been part of the Bloody Run Creek lawsuit. And this group is called the Driftless Water Defenders. We're going to work on protecting water quality in the driftless area of Iowa. And I'm pretty sure I'm going to be the executive director of this group. I know that Jim wants me to do that. And so I intend to do it, at least at this point. And so hopefully this new group will help obstruct things like we see with Supreme Beef in the driftless area of Iowa and help protect the one part of Iowa that still has some environmental integrity. And so I'm looking forward to doing that. And so, yes, as Christine said, I am an angler, although I thought when I retired I was going to fish all the time, and I hardly ever fish anymore because I'm so busy. And so I don't like that. But anyway, I'm gonna fish tomorrow, thankfully. And I got a guy coming down from Minneapolis to fish with me. And so if you read my book, I thank you. And if you read my Substack, I thank you. And I think the vision I have for water quality and conservation in Iowa maybe is out of the mainstream a little bit. And I think it's time to try something different. And so I think this approach we've had to conservation here over the last half century has largely failed in terms of nutrient pollution. We did have some successes on soil erosion, especially from about 1986 up to about the year 2000, but soil erosion really hasn't gotten any better since about the year 2000. And so nutrient pollution has definitely gotten worse, especially for nitrogen. So I really think it behooves the environmental community to take a more confrontational approach to these things. I think the industry, the agricultural industry, is not going to give up their right to pollute without a fight. And I think that's just apparent to me. And I know there's a lot of people that don't want to accept that and would rather continue on with the traditional approaches, but I think the time has come to try something different here. And I think, with this corn, soy, CAFO system, we know it's what we call a leaky system. We know it's going to pollute. We know that it has some inherent vulnerabilities, and we see it right now. We see sky high nitrate levels in our stream right now. And we're in a post drought condition, and so the rains have returned, but it's not all that wet. We're just seeing basically normal precipitation over the last 6 to 8 weeks, and it's just sent nitrate through the roof. And so that is an illustration of how vulnerable this system is. And so we really need to transition the system to something different, something that's designed around environmental outcomes and human nutrition. And so as it stands now, about 60% of our corn goes to produce fuel ethanol. And I really have a hard time understanding why we tolerate the environmental degradation for that, right? If we were preventing people from starving by doing what we're doing here, well, then okay, right? I think most people would say that's a noble activity, but to do what we're doing here to produce ethanol and then to produce protein for the world's wealthy people, and then ask the state's residents to endure the pollution associated with these things, I think is wrong. I think it's a moral wrong. And I think, we need to fight for something better. Now, it's clear that the industry is not ready to transition to something different. And we see efforts at both the state and federal level to continue to entrench the current system. And so we see that with the carbon pipeline and this sustainable aviation fuel, presumably going to gobble up a lot of the ethanol as electric cars start to displace gasoline engine cars. And so I think the industry is doubling down on the ethanol, and so they're not ready to transition to a different cropping system and different animal production systems. And so until they're ready to transition to a new system, then I think the corn soybean system should be regulated. We're subsidizing and indemnifying it And I think because of that, we as taxpayers and the public have a right to say how it's operated. And for me, that means laws. And so I think there's certain things here that would clearly improve the situation immediately. Now, they may not, you know, solve everything right away, and they're not magic bullets, but clearly they would improve some things fairly immediately. And so, stream buffers, for example, I was very happy to see Izaak Walton League register for the stream buffer law that was introduced in the legislature this past session. It's Conservation 101, right? To buffer streams. It's Conservation 101. We cannot even get our streams buffered here in Iowa. And so, how are we going to do these big aspirational things like a 45% reduction in nitrogen and phosphorus, which is a huge lift for the state and for agriculture? How are we going to do that if we can't even do the easy things, which is buffer streams, for example? And so I think we really need to make the existing ag establishment defend things that are indefensible. And so that includes things like resisting buffering of streams. It includes things like restricting nitrogen application. We know that nitrogen inputs in Iowa are way above what the recommended rate from Iowa State is. That's going to be in my Substack tomorrow morning. And so if we can't even do these things, how are we going to do these real aspirational things? And so I think from my perspective, we're really at a crossroads here. We need to think differently about how we're going to achieve these desired environmental outcomes. I think we're at a crossroads for the state too. We see these news articles about young people leaving the state. Young people don't want to live here. And so I have 3 adult children myself. One of them lives in Seattle and 2 of them live in Colorado. And they don't want to live here. They don't want, they want these outdoor amenities. And young people, I think, want different things than what we wanted, what my generation wanted when I was their age. And so I think my generation, we wanted things. Well, I think these young people now, they want experiences. And they want to live in a place where they can get experiences. And our society is much more mobile now. And so they're going to go to those places where they can get them. And so I think the future of Iowa really links up to this environmental degradation. And I think it's critical for the state to try to improve the condition here. And, if agriculture wants to be a part of that, great, I'm fine with it. But everything I see is I don't think they want to. And so I think they're going to have to be dragged kicking and screaming into this new order, if you will. And, that's where my head is now. And so I guess I'll open it up to questions here and I'll discuss whatever you guys would like to discuss this evening.
Well, we have,
No,
oh, go ahead.
go ahead, Christine.
Oh, I was just gonna, Mary Ellen has a question in there. What would be the top conservation issues in the Farm Bill reauthorization that we should advocate for?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure that there's really the Farm Bill. I don't see the Farm Bill as the tool here. I think, but that being said, I think certainly we need to get farming off of our most vulnerable land. And so the way we do that is with, more CRP and conservation easements and these sorts of things. think, you know, what really needs to happen here is a change in the structure of Corn Belt agriculture. And I'm not really sure the Farm Bill is where that starts. I think, you know, the first place it starts is renewable fuel standard. And I think we need to get rid of the renewable fuel standard. We have an area of land of about 11,000 square miles in Iowa that is being used to grow corn for ethanol. So that's an area of land the size of 20 counties. Out of 99 counties, 20 counties are being used to grow corn for ethanol. Why are we doing this? You know, the evidence does not show that it reduces greenhouse gases. There's all these consequences associated with corn production. Along with that, the price of land in Iowa has increased in lockstep with the amount of ethanol that's produced in this country. So as a result, we have all these young people that want to get into farming, but they can't, right? Because the price of land is so high, and because farming corn and soybeans is pretty easy. And so we see people doing it till they're 85 years old. And so we need land reform here. And so I'm not a person that thinks we're going to get this big conversion of cropland into prairie, right? I don't I don't think that's ever going to happen. I don't think it's reasonable to think that we're going to have massive conversion of acres from agriculture to prairie or wetland or whatever. We could certainly use some of that, but there's not going to be wholesale transition of land in that way. So what we need is we need to transform or convert land into different cropping systems. So we need to look at what this land that's being used for ethanol what else can we use it for and still maintain farmer prosperity? Well, you know, as I said, a lot of young people would want to get into farming. Well, young people might have some ideas about what else we can do, right? Maybe they don't want to do corn and soybean and CAFOs. Maybe they want to grow apples, or they want to grow wheat or other small grains or something of that nature that would be more focused on human nutrition and environmental outcomes and not commerce. Everything now is focused on commerce. And so I really think that we need some changes in the marketplace to help this along. The other big thing we have here that's a real obstacle is rented land. So we have I think about 55% of our land is rented to the farmer operator. And, you know, this is a really good place to start with new ideas. And so, for example, look, how about cover crops on all rented land? You know, why could we not require that? Or, you know, other things about rented land that would be a burden for the owner, right? And would maybe make them think about divesting of their land. And so we have a lot of people in Minneapolis and Chicago and Des Moines and Omaha that are sitting in offices and they own farmland and they rent it out. You know, maybe if we start requiring conservation, maybe if our laws, if we had the courage to make any, maybe our laws could focus on this rented land first. That increases the cost of production. Then they might be incentivized to divest of the land. And again, we might catalyze some land reform. So, long answer there, but
That's great. Mary Ellen Miller has her hand up, and then Evelyn Riley. So Mary Ellen.
Chris, your comment about what we need to change, I think is so critical, but my concern is last year, Assistant Secretary of Agriculture, Robert Bounty came to Iowa and
Yeah.
did a presentation at White Rock. And he was engaged afterwards about the need for regulation. And it's clear from his comments and Tom Vilsack's behavior that this isn't even a partisan issue anymore. There is just no appetite for any kind of regulation on an industry that is polluting beyond capacity to manage it. You haven't even mentioned our cancer rates in Iowa. To me, I call this our Cuyahoga River moment, right? That we can't swim in our streams and rivers, that we can't eat a fish out of them. I'm surprised that you can find clean waters, but maybe up there you can't. But I mean, it's what will it take, really? You have blown the whistle. We've got a lot of us on this call tonight that are advocating our hearts out. And I liked your comment. I think maybe we just do have to get more confrontational. My generation remembers all of those. I mean, we were reminded with the college sit-ins recently about what it was like during the Vietnam War. And so how do we rally enough people? That's been my frustration. The evidence is so clear that we're in big trouble, but
Well,
I just don't, I'm frustrated. I know there are a lot of people on this call that are also.
so I'm really honest about this. Tom Vilsack is Secretary of Agriculture. It's been demoralizing for me. Really has. I think Vilsack is, I mean, it's clear, and I think he would admit this if he was asked, that he's very much an establishment agriculture guy. He really is all in with the existing systems, and he's all for entrenching the existing systems. I don't know either him or Bonnie. I do know about Robert Bonnie. I think he's right there in the same mindset with Vilsack. But when I tell people, people ask me all the time about this when I do my programs, and I say, look, if you think you can go into a voting booth and check the correct box and that, change is magically going to happen. No, I mean, it's completely apparent that that's not the way it works. And so, I'm sort of a devotee of Howard Zinn, and so I love Howard Zinn's books. I like his writing, and if you read his books, I mean, people on the right, they hate Howard Zinn, right? People's History of the United States is the most hated book by the political right in the United States, but he's harder on Democrats in that book than he is Republicans. Right. And so I wish Republicans would read that thing and really see who he's criticizing there. He criticizes the left more than he does the right. And so I think, and what he says in his writing is, look, change happens through grassroots action. It happens through grassroots action. And so when we look at the civil rights movement in the 1950s, the courts did not find in favor of African American people here in the United States until there were public sentiment, going in that direction. And so Rosa Parks, for example, she got on the bus, right? And the Supreme Court magically decided that, there was no right of these states to ban people from riding on certain parts of the bus. They just magically decided that after there were all these protests. And so I think that's the way it's got to be with water quality. We need grassroots action. And people don't like to hear this, but it's the truth. The history of these things in the United States is that they are resolved in the courts. Okay. That is just the truth. They're resolved in the courts. They're not resolved in state legislatures. They're not resolved in Congress. And so that's what it's going to take. It's going to take grassroots action, and it's going to take lawsuits, and it's going to take court action to get the outcomes that we want. I firmly believe that.
So Chris, we had another question. Caroline Van Shank wants to know, what do you think about Iowa's EPA petition and what's in it?
So I like what they've done here. I'm very familiar with Minnesota's petition, and so I think it was correct for Iowa Environmental Council to follow along here with this. You know, I've read the whole thing pretty carefully. There's a few things in there that probably need to be tidied up a little bit, but I think it's going to be extremely difficult for EPA to decide differently for Iowa than they did for Minnesota. And so EPA is requiring the Minnesota agencies to do various things regarding nitrate pollution. And so I think if they don't do the same thing in Iowa, it's going to look brazenly political. You know, Minnesota right now anyway is a blue state, Iowa's a red state. And so if they say, yeah, Minnesota needs action and Iowa doesn't need action, that's going to look awfully bad. And so I do think that, and I've heard rumors too, that people at DNR are expecting EPA to require similar sorts of things that they required in Minnesota. The problem we have with both the Minnesota situation and the Iowa situation, when you look at the affected people in these karst areas, it's really not that many people. And so I think in Minnesota, they figure there's about 3,000 households that are affected by the contaminated nitrate in the karst area. Well, that's only about 10,000 people, right? And so 3,000 households, it's really not going to be that much money to go in and put RO units in these 3,000 houses. You know, maybe $10 million, which, you know, sounds like a lot, but it's really nothing. And so I really fear that one of the outcomes will be that they'll just go in and slap RO units in the kitchens of these affected houses and call it good, right? And so I think that is a real possibility here with these petitions. But look, I mean, as I said, this is the way these things have been resolved. If you look at the history of it in the United States, this is how they've been resolved. And so I think this petition is the correct thing to do.
Thank you, Chris. So Evelyn Riley has her hand up. Evelyn?
Hi. First, I just wanted to say thank you so much for speaking so plainly and directly. I've been a student and working in agricultural conservation for probably about 10 years now, and I can think of maybe one other person I know who speaks so honestly, publicly, and I'm just incredibly grateful for that because being, you know, early in my career and from an urban area originally too, there's a lot that I'm trying to figure out of, you know, what should we work for? What should we advocate for? What should we promote? And it's so helpful to be able to look to people like you who are just so honest. So I'm so grateful. So thank you.
You're welcome.
And my question is, I'm curious for your take on winter oil seeds. I work at the University of Minnesota and with Greenland's Blue Waters. We don't do the research on that ourselves, but the U is doing a lot. And I'll preface it by saying I'm not attached to any particular crop. My interest is in the outcomes of these cropping systems. So I'm curious, do you think they could help address some of these problems? Do you think they will intensify corporate control in agriculture? I'd love to know your take on winter oil seeds.
So I'm for any alternative crop to other than corn and soybean. And so I'd be very much in favor of the winter oil seeds, but also I'd be in favor of something like oats. And so, Iowa used to be the top oat growing state in the United States, and we don't grow oats anymore. Well, guess what? We still have the world's largest oat processing facility in Cedar Rapids, but they won't buy any oats from Iowa. They've got their supply chains all entrenched, and so they're getting their oats from Canada. And so I think in the Corn Belt, Minnesota and Iowa and the other states, well, yes, we need a more diversity of crops. And so whether it's winter oil seeds or whether it's hemp or whether it's oats or wheat or whatever, yes, we need more diversity of crops. So let's ask ourselves, what keeps that from happening, right? Well, some of it is the infrastructure. We don't have the infrastructure to support other crops in many cases, but it's the renewable fuel standard. That's what keeps us entrenched in this system. And so when I bring up this idea of these other crops, these winter oil seeds, as you mentioned, being a possibility. You bring that up, a lot of times people laugh. Oh, well, where am I going to take them? Where am I going to take those? How am I going to sell them? Well, my response is we created this behemoth of an ethanol industry, right? We created that. It exists for one reason and one reason only, and that's government policy. And so if we were able to create this behemoth of an ethanol industry, we ought to be able to create the infrastructure that would support, these alternative crops. And we know that these alternative crops, many of them are much better from the perspective of human nutrition and environmental outcomes. And so why don't we do that? Why don't our policy people, why don't our elected people get behind these ideas?
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Caroline, do you want to just make any comments on your comments that you put in the text? There she is. You got to unmute. There you go.
Well, probably not, because I don't want to derail Chris. I live in Carrs Country, Minnesota, and am up to my eyeballs in working around the EPA petition. A group of us use it as our raison d'etre for work in the past year and in the year going forward. And there are a few of us in our group who are old enough to just be done being nice. Minnesota nice is just like, we're done with that. And some of us were never into it in the first place. And the issue of, Chris, that you raised about being fearful that our state, Minnesota, is going to be okay with RO systems, or the other favorite line is to dig deeper, as if nitrates don't keep on going down our Carrs Country topography ad nauseum. That is a fear that they'll call that good. Not to get too hopeful, but there is a section in our EPA response to our petition that requires a long-term response to the actual sources of the problem. And so some of our work is trying to get well testing and getting RO systems and bottled water as an immediate fix for some people with really detrimental and dangerous levels of nitrate contamination in their wells right now. But some of our TAC also has to do with legislation that forces feedlot regulations and state laws to look at the actual causes of the well contaminations. And the sort of gross irony, or maybe I'm just being naive, is that the agencies in Minnesota that are at question, the Department of Health, the Department of Ag, and the Pollution Control Agency, all have fabulous and fairly current and substantiated research that defines and names exactly the issue that our petition made the case for. And yet they are perfectly happy to hide behind RO systems, a few here and a few there. And so part of our challenge as a grassroots group of volunteers is to keep raising the level of conversation and buffer it with data and facts. Not that the agencies want to hear their own facts, but keep making enough noise to, as I say, let people know whose door to bang down. And it is a measured effect. At our own organizing meetings, we rant and rave, and then we strategize on how to be effective. We're good with being mad to a degree. We're good with calling shit, and we're pretty done with letting the agency community get away with what we consider to be murder. And saying that is one thing, and doing it is another. And the strongest way for us to do it is to get a lot of us doing it. And that's where we are. And it is, as I said in my message here, it is hard work to know how to do it, to be heard, because you can yell and scream and not be heard. You can speak softly and be heard. And we're, as always, trying to find that route.
Well, I will say about agency people, and I've worked with dozens of Iowa DNR people over the years. And so they are human beings, right? And they do respond to the loudest squeaks, right? The squeaky wheel gets the grease. And so they do respond to, whoever's loudest. And, I know DNR people have told me the thing that they worry about most is somebody from the legislature sending them an email or somebody from the industry sending them a nasty email. And so, I mean, that's got to work both ways. And, we have in Iowa, I know the situation in Minnesota, and it doesn't even compare to Iowa in terms of what we call regulatory capture, right? So the agencies have been captured in Iowa. They're completely captured. I think it's not nearly that bad in Minnesota. Now, that doesn't mean that sort of thing doesn't exist in Minnesota, but I think it's not as bad in Minnesota. And so I think, you would do well to continue to agitate with the agencies. I really encourage that.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing about Minnesota is the counties do have some authority to at least restrict expansion of the existing livestock facilities. I mean, we don't have that in Iowa.
Yeah,
And so I always tell people here, look, the legislature is not the only governing body in Iowa. We also have county supervisors, we have city councils, and so forth. And so you really need to agitate with your local governing bodies, and it's not just the legislature.
I so agree with you, Chris. And in fact, as one of our volunteer members reminds us when we're all having a really bad day, is he said there are some agency staff people who actually quietly welcome this agitation and this petition in order to justify them doing what they would like to do, that they have not had the latitude and the leadership support to do. There's a lot of passing the buck, but his rejoinder to us is to work with the agency people who are willing to work with us. And you're right, they are there. But Yeah, I don't disagree with anything you're saying. And you're right, having local control where counties like the one I live in can actually put a limit on animal units, that is a powerful piece of the story. It's constantly being hammered away at and challenged in the courts, but it is in place so far. And that's a good thing. It works in our favors right now. Yeah.
That's
Thank you
great.
so much, Chris, for your time here.
Caroline, thanks. That's great. Chris, we have a couple more people. Jill Crafton has her hand up, and then Lynn Therier will be after her.
I agree with everything Carolyn said. We have a different structure in Minnesota, so we've got a lot of grassroots conservation people that are agitating or pressed for better legislation. But like we have watershed districts, and I sit on a watershed district board, and so you've got opportunities to make a difference at the local level. And I also represent them on a board where I'm sitting with our PCA commissioner and our DNR commissioner and our ag commissioner. And I truly feel that, like, our PCA commissioner is concerned, but the problem is an insanity thing. You know, we keep doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome, and it ain't happening. For me, the soil health science, everything I've learned, it's just totally turned everything upside down. And we have to start rethinking everything based on what we know about how that system works and all the things you have to have in place to make that ecosystem work. So that's kind of where I've been trying to push at this board of soil and water and soil resources, is maybe it's time to rethink, kind of like you zone a city or a county. What's an acceptable practice? So in the dripless area, maybe we can't have feedlots. And that's a big stretch. So I don't know where you all are in terms of like practical farmers. I mean, whether there's any lift there with those people. I've been at events where they've been there, like at Tom Cotter's farm and down in the Austin, Minnesota area. But I think some of it's just rethinking it. But if you don't have a constituency or residency that, I mean, if you've got farmers that just want to keep doing the same thing they've always done, how do you seek out the like-minded people, Chris, that care like you care, like I care, to come together and agitate? And I think Carolyn's totally right. You've got to have that going on. I mean, I can try to talk from the other end of it, but I also, and even in my watershed district, so we're urban and we have 3 creeks that go into Minnesota River. 2 of the creeks have 13 lakes on them. And so I've been really pushing, and we're starting to do this, not just do best management practices that require reducing phosphorus by 60% and total suspended solids by 90%, but that we actually build some resilience on the landscape. So we're kind of trying to develop this ecosystem health action plan to look at, we're 40% lawns in the district. Can we start getting more prairie or trees, or what can we do to start restoring nature's ability? So I'm focused on that water cycle, and that we've totally disrupted that water cycle. So that's kind of where I'm going. And I know, so we're requiring buffers around our public waters. I mean, you've nailed it, Chris, on all the things that we need to do. It's just how do you build a grassroots group that cares like that? And like, I think Carolyn's right on. You may have to just use litigation to get things moving. I don't know how else that's gotten a response, but I know the current governor, when he got in there, he appointed a woman. She had done a lot of sustainability work with Best Buy company, and She was trying to make a difference, and the legislature wouldn't confirm her and booted her out of her job. So it's
Well,
just
I
the
will
politics.
say, in terms of the driftless, should the driftless agriculture look like the rest of agriculture in the 4 states? I would say no, it should not. And so, but, these farmers here, and I see them, they want to, at least in the Iowa part, they want to do what the farmers are doing on the rest of Iowa. And so when we look at the driftless, historically, the agriculture there has been, the small dairies and then diverse rotations of corn, alfalfa, oats, not so much soybeans. But now, I heard a farmer say once, well, when the cows go out, the soybeans come in. And so then when we go to all cash crop of corn and soybeans, that's when you get the nitrate pollution of the aquifers. And so I think it's reasonable to think that these areas in the karst geology should have a different type of agriculture than the rest of the 4 states. As far as what do we do, my training is as a scientist, right? And, I recognize and I'm pleased that what I have written has resonated with people, but I want to emphasize, that doesn't mean that I have the answers on, what we need to do to solve this. I mean, I know organizing, right? I know that's one thing, organizing. Beyond that, I don't know too much. And what I would suggest to everyone is take a look at the Grange. I don't know if anybody has heard of the Grange or knows the history of the Grange, but the Grange was formed 100 years ago. And it was formed by farmers in response to the railroads having a monopoly on grain transport in the upper Midwest. And so the Grange was one of the leading advocates for navigation on the upper Mississippi River because they wanted to get grain out of here and they wanted some competition for the railroads. And the Grange was very effective. Okay. Why was the Grange effective? It's because the national organization gave the local chapters great latitude to do what they wanted to do and to agitate the way they wanted to agitate. And so the Grange people went to every possible meeting they could, and they agitated for what they wanted. And they got it. They got navigation on the upper Mississippi River. And so I think there needs to be a Grange for environment. And so we need local chapters of whatever organization that go to meetings, that go to city council meetings, and go to school board meetings even, and go to county supervisor meetings and agitate for the environmental outcomes that we want.
That's great, Chris. There's a couple people that's Lynn has her hand up, even though it's not up, but she's there. So Lynn, and then Evelyn has her hand up, and we have a few more questions in the chat.
Thank you, Christine. Chris, you're very enlightening. Thank you very much. I have to figure out how to get into your stack, whatever you call that. But one good thing I wanted to bring up is that agitation and whatever does take time. League of Women Voters and many others, 100 plus years to vote, and we still can't get the ERA through Congress. It was mentioned by the lady previous to me about contacting our governor. Governor Walz ran on 3 things this session, one of which was water quality. So after our EPA petition, we sent him a letter from our local league saying, your people in all 3 departments have done 0. We don't even have the plan that the EPA required within the legal number of days, 90 days they get. And his response was, well, contact your legislature. totally missed the point. So yes, we're agitating again, and it's great to know that we can agitate with Iowa and Illinois and pretty soon Missouri through the ILO with the league. So thanks for these opportunities. It's great to be across states.
Fabulous. Evelyn, you had your hand up again, and then we have a few people on the, a few people.
It's Evelyn that has her hand up, Chris.
Yeah, Evelyn, sorry.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Question around livestock and meat consumption. So, like, obviously, the relatively high demand for meat and other livestock products is a part of the unsustainability of the system. And I know there's data that, like, well-managed pasture, for example, can be actually quite good in terms of water quality, might even sequester some carbon, although that's obviously so much more variable. So I've been thinking a lot about, like, how do we message around that? Like, some of what we do, is public facing and, talking to consumers. I guess the phrase I've kind of heard is like less meat, better meat. Um, is that enough? I'm curious for your take on, how do we shift, our meat consumption patterns?
So there is a good demand for meat, right? The demand for meat is strong. And so, I never like to talk about, or I never like to tell people what to eat, because there's all these cultural and religious, and traditional things that are tied up to what we eat, including meat.
Hmm.
Now, that being said, I mean, do I think we eat too much meat? Yes, I do. And, and we eat junk meat too. And you look, I mean, how much meat is purchased at gas stations, for example? I mean, a lot, right? When I was growing up, you didn't walk into a gas station and get a slice of sausage pizza, right? That didn't exist. And so we eat a lot of meat in that way. And so I think focusing on quality meat is good. Now, almost everything I read about sustainable agricultural systems includes return of cattle to pasture. And so when we look at Iowa once had a bigger beef industry than what we had now, and all these cattle were on pasture. Then the renewable fuel standard came in, and we moved the cattle, a lot of them, to, eastern Colorado and Nebraska, and we turned all that pasture land into crops. And so I think it's unfortunate that this thing with the cow farts has gotten a lot of mileage in terms of climate. We really have to look at what's the trade-off here. What's the greenhouse gas footprint of cattle on pasture versus crops? And I think the cattle on pasture is going to be, better, right? And so I think, how do we get there? And, our choices as consumers, of course, are important, but it's going to take more than that. And so we need our government to incentivize these alternative livestock production systems. This is one area where Tom Vilsack is a huge disappointment. I mean, huge, because look at what he's doing. They're promoting these digesters for the big confinements, and the digesters they're just going to enable the big livestock producers to get bigger, and it will further incentivize the confinement of animals. And so I really think people, it's good to think about cattle on pasture. I think we need that, and that's part of this thing where, look, we don't want to necessarily go in and take the land from the farmers. We want farmers to be prosperous. We want them to be able to do what they love. And, that's going to probably include different livestock production systems.
Thank you.
Well, I think Chris's time is up, unless people want to stay on. And if he wants to stay on, I'm sure people will. I mean, there's lots of us that would probably talk all night with Chris here this evening, and we're so grateful. It looks like Jill just popped her hand up again. But I just want to say one thing about the power of people. You know, the Izaak Walton League's movement 100 years ago to have that legislation passed for the refuge. We can have another movement like that again. There were 2 million women that were on board with that. And we just need to rally the troops and say, enough is enough. And we're not going to stand this anymore. We want this, you know, cleaned up. And it's time for another, you know, halt. So, Jill?
Yeah, the other thing that I'm lucky to have is I have 2 food co-ops in my area, so I can go to one or the other, but I don't go to the grocery store anymore. I can get everything organic, and my meat is grown with rotational grazing and good, you know, without the chemicals and the tillage and all that stuff. So that's another way to try to approach it. If you can create a demand for systems that are done well and that are healthy, that you vote with your pocketbook too. So I just thought that was another thing to mention.
It's a
Okay,
great,
well, I invite you to look at my Substack. It's riverraccoon.substack.com. You may have to, I'm not, I don't
I'll put
remember.
it in the chat. Chris, I did put it in earlier. I put your last link in there, and then also a link to your book. I'll bring it back down again and pop it in again.
And so I am happy, as I said, that people like what I write, and I'm happy that it resonates. But please don't think that the hand of God has come down and bestowed all the answers upon me, because that has not happened, right? And so it's going to take organizing. It's going to take, grassroots sort of pressure to make change happen. And it's going to be a long, hard slog. And the people in big ag are going to fight tenaciously, right? They're going to fight tenaciously to retain the rights that they have right now. And so it's going to take a lot to change it.
And somebody did have a question about your new movement with the driftless water defenders. Is there anything else you want to tell us about that, or should we be looking?
So we're going to have a series of meetings, I think, throughout the month of June. And so hopefully those will be publicized in some way. And I think, what has happened up there at Bloody Run is going to be a bit of a model. Now, I think, Bloody Run is looking like a loss right now, right? It's looking like Supreme Beef is going to prevail, but it was close, right? It went to the 9th inning, and so I think victory is possible in some of these things, and I think we need to stay keep our dauber up, right, and stay encouraged that we can make a difference. And, that's all we can do. And so I think as far as the driftless water defenders, I think, again, at least in Iowa, this is sort of our last refuge, right? It's an oasis in the corn desert, right? That's what it is. And so Wisconsin and Minnesota, they both have other areas that still have some ecological integrity. In Iowa, we don't. That's it, right? The driftless, that's it. Wisconsin and Minnesota have other stuff. And so I think we really need to circle the wagons around the driftless. And so I'm going to help people do that.
That's fantastic.
Was there a link to that somewhere in the chat or something?
I don't think you have a social media website ready
We
yet.
don't, we got nothing. Well, we
Okay.
just filed the papers of incorporation, if that's even what you call it, but it's
Yeah.
so yeah.
We'll keep you posted through our networks, and we'll we'll probably have a follow-up later on with Chris again and more conversations about this, because this is our mission, right, Dale?
Yeah.
Water quality. That's what
And
we,
if I remember right, Christine, you do these once a month on the second Tuesday, is that right?
that's right. Mm-hmm.
So once you've registered, you will be getting notices of each month. And we hope you will join us, and we hope you will stay in touch and let us know what's happening in your neighborhood as well, so that we get all of the optimistic things out to everybody. And if we need to rally the troops and activate and organize in your area, make sure that Christine knows and can get it out to the rest of us.
Yeah.
And thank you, Chris. My name is Carl Hawkinson here in Minnesota, but your book was more than a breath of fresh air. I'm spent my career in soil and water conservation, and I'm letting everybody and anybody know about your book. Thanks for telling it like it is.
Okay, you're welcome. Thanks. Thanks for reading it.
That's great. Well, that makes it a little worth his while to spend the evening with us when he has some nice compliments like that, and hopefully a few more people will order the book and check out his Substack too. It's just fantastic. So thank you, everybody. Have a
Thank
beautiful
you.
evening.
All
And
right.
this
Thanks a
this
lot.
has been recorded, so we will have a copy soon on our website. Have a beautiful evening, everybody.
You too. Thanks, Christine. Thanks, Chris. Bye.
Yeah, thank you. Talk to everybody soon. Thank you.